Welcome to the Let's Grab Coffee podcast. I hope you're okay with, a sort of a chap from the UK. I figured, do we do Let's Grab Tea? Do we do Let's Grab Coffee? I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure.
I don't really drink tea, and so coffee's my MO. So yes, but very non-British of me.
Yeah, you're disappointing a lot of your British counterparts, man.
Hmm.
No, thank you very much for doing this. As I think many folks know or might not know, I've had the pleasure of knowing you for a couple of years now, having both been in Chicago and kind of just as part of the startup ecosystem. I feel like I've tried to keep up with the growth of Zero Hash. It's been a little difficult, because the company's been crushing it, knock on wood, and continues to do so. Building in the fintech space. We'll get into the weeds, but for folks who may not be familiar about Zero Hash,
Yeah.
this is one of the top, if not the top, fintech companies out of Chicago. Last year was ranked fourth on Deloitte's Fast 500 list. It's an API, an SDK that allows businesses to basically plug in and embed crypto assets on their platforms. So think of the Stripes of the world, Interactive Brokers of the world are able to, on their platform, offer crypto side by side within their already existing infrastructure.
Yeah.
In a very simple nutshell, it's basically creating more access to digital products and crypto assets. That's the gist. I want to hear from you. Who is Edward, first of all? Kind of the upbringing before we get into the weeds on Zero Hash, now that people know the litmus test. But like, who is Edward? Who was Edward before co-founder and CEO of Zero Hash?
Yeah, I mean, look, I try not to define myself as well by what I do. I think that's one of the nice things about Chicago, is that no one really cares. Partly because I think Chicago is one of the more diverse cities from an economic perspective, right? So when you go to San Francisco and all your friends are in tech, that's kind of your social kudos. And actually, in hindsight, that's I think one of the reasons I like building in Chicago is kind of you keep your head down. But yeah, obviously you can tell from my accent, and you joked about tea. I mean, I grew up in the UK. I came to the US for grad school, and I went to MIT. I thought I would go back to the UK, but then I stayed and was really fortunate to raise money for a first business that was in the alternative commodity space. So highly regulated, but also somewhat controversial. So I've always been drawn to counter trend. I like proving people wrong. I think that's always been a common thread for me. Like at school, if I didn't find a class helpful, I would just not go to the class. And the teachers were fine with it often because I would do well on the grades. Like I just sometimes like to learn and be by myself. And that's and I like I don't need to fit within structures. And that can sometimes get you into trouble. But that's honestly why I think I went out on my own to start my own business. It's not that you don't have any rules, right? It's not that you don't have any bosses. I mean, I report to a board, but I think I like the ability to push against the grain. And especially building in crypto and startups, this space goes hot, cold very quickly. And so sometimes people think you're a genius. Sometimes people think you're crazy. And neither are true, right? And so you're always proving people wrong in one way or another. So that's kind of been my upbringing. I was fortunate to be able to take risks. I was fortunate to be able to come to grad school here in the US. And especially for my first business, it gives you way more credibility than you probably deserve going to a great school. And so, I knew nothing about really commodities in hindsight. I knew nothing really about trading in hindsight, but we had $5 million and we built a good business that we were able to sell. But that's kind of been my commonality, I would say, from a relatively early age.
You, I think, if I'm not mistaken, have spent, is it more than 10 years in the US?
Yeah. I think it's coming up
12 years?
Yeah.
I figured it's around there. So 12 years in the US, and then previously it was mostly the UK, if not all the UK, correct?
Yeah. So yeah, grew up in the UK and just outside of London. So where the River Thames meets the North Sea. So I still very proud to be from the UK. My mom's Spanish, so I'm half Spanish, half English. Proud to be, I think, European, given that the UK left the EU. So I'm very proud of those pieces. But it's interesting when you leave your home country for a long period of time. To some degree, you're an outsider in both countries, right? When I go home, there's differences, right? I can see those differences. When I'm here, I'm also have a different perspective on things as well. So, I mean, that's part what I love is, being a little different is great. But yeah, I mean, I'm still very proud to be English. Definitely still support the UK, England in the football /World Cup. So Yeah, I mean, but definitely, I would say have a more American mindset to building businesses. And I probably think I wouldn't have been able to have the success I've had in the UK. That's something that I hope I can help change, but it's going to take, I think, a generation. And I think it's just a difference between mindsets between building in the US and Europe.
Yeah, very few are lucky to call England and Spain, their go-to teams in the
Exactly. I was going to
Well,
go to during the last tournament.
those are awesome options. That's kind of the question I was leaning with Edward is having sort of seen both markets, right? And you've studied in both, and you've operated in both.
Yeah.
From a career perspective, and now obviously as an entrepreneur. The question is twofold. What does the US have that is very different in the UK from the perspective of being able to sort of drive this innovation that you've been able to do for the past 10 years? And where does having the context of UK markets actually benefit you as a C-suite executive?
These are tough questions, philosophical questions. I did actually do politics, philosophy, and economics at university, so I should
Drop it on us.
put it off. But look, I think the US, it's no secret, the US, one, has enormous calls of capital.
Mm,
Risk-taking tolerance here, I would say across the board is high. I find it kind of crazy sometimes that you can literally drive your own like little pontoon with no license, no nothing down the Chicago River. I mean, that's like it's always, I say to my friends, like, that just shows you kind of mindset towards risk. Hey, in America, you'll get sued, but you can kind of do what you want. And so obviously access to capital, this mindset, failure is okay here. I think it's also just the credibility, like the social currency here,
mm,
to some degree, right, is money. In the UK, it's class, and you can never change your class, but you can change your money status. And I think that maybe just drives people in a different way. And I sometimes think that about myself when I go home. I don't come from a inverted commas posh place in the UK. I didn't go to private school, so I'm not part of a certain class. And so no matter how much
mm,
money you make, it doesn't matter. And so it's not that, social credibility or social currency is how you define your life or what you do. But there are these nuances and differences, I think, in terms of how societies work.
mm,
And I think that instills kind of incentive structures that enable you to start a business here more easily and, more frankly, with more ambition. I think when I look back on the UK and Europe, we've looked at maybe buying some companies because it does give you an advantage to buy European products. I was just with Tom, the founder of Monzo in San Francisco this week.
mm,
And he goes, I think he was sharing with me that he thinks that the most undervalued asset right now is UK European startups. And I would tend to agree until, the dollar is particularly weak right now. So, I think obviously if you think about the US and the UK, or the US versus UK and Europe, the UK and Europe have incredible universities, incredible talent, incredible skills, incredible education. But the number of startups that really hit velocity of, whatever you want to draw that line to be, unicorn, there's a difference. There's a disconnect. And why is that? And I do think it's a societal piece that exists. In terms of advantages, I mean, aside from the accent, which definitely gives you more credibility here,
yeah.
I definitely would have met my wife without it. Although she's now tired of it, she said it wore off after 3 months. Look, I think different perspective, whether it be culture, race, anything, being able to look at a problem differently, I think is always a good thing. I'm very fortunate, the way in the UK, the education I received and these sorts of pieces. But I think just being able to look at things differently, being comfortable, somewhat being an outsider is kind of is okay.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, also dealing with ambiguity, right? Like,
Yeah.
and your ability to readjust in a new country to build that sort of new persona for yourself and integrate
Yeah.
culturally, I think is super, especially as you build large teams that scale internationally and you have, people from different walks of life. I think it makes you also more empathetic to,
Oh, big time.
to
I look, I think I don't really talk about this often, but one I always think about, like, you can never really change certain things about yourself or certain things. And so sometimes disadvantages you should try and turn into advantages. And so, look, I came here, I'm an immigrant here. I've gone through the visa process. I've had, all these sorts of nuances and complexities. And so one of the things I do is like when there's a person here that we have to transfer their green card or anything else, it's like, look, we really take this seriously.
Mm.
I've lived it. I know the uncertainty you can create in your life. I know it can be incredibly scary. And so I try to lean into some of these differences or being a non-US founder for our advantage, because that is something that people do think about.
That resonates a lot as someone on a work visa.
Yeah.
As a Canadian living in the US, I often talk about like you have company risk and you have country risk,
Yep.
right? Especially in different environments, and I think just having someone who actually understands the fact that it can create a lot of stress and anxiety, just despite everything that you do, I think is
Yeah, I mean, look, you can't
very nice.
we definitely can't compete on like, there's a group every single person in this company could earn more money elsewhere. And so it has to be something else that's driving them. It's either the mission, it's
Mm,
equity, it's kind of ownership, it's the opportunities that you provide, or it's potentially like other intangibles, such as the one that I shared around, hey, I understand what it's like to be an immigrant. I understand that this things you can't you can't mess around. And we as a company, we commit to making sure that we hit every deadline. Do things like expedited processing, all these sorts of things. And so that means something, right? These non-monetary elements, and that's how we have to compete. Because as a startup, we're not going to be the highest paying job in every single instance, right? And so
mm.
that's kind of what I try to lean into is lean into your differences and try and make them advantages as much as possible.
I love that. Has that been a leadership philosophy you've had for the previous two startups? Because you've had a fintech startup, which is what you started,
Yeah.
and then it was a trading commodities platform, I believe. That was the
Yeah.
second, previous to Zero Hash. Were those two in the UK, by the way, or were they in?
Yeah. So the first business was more, lifestyle, didn't raise outside money, first foray into starting a business with a friend. So kind of it was a legal business, but wasn't, we made a little bit of money, but wasn't really like a what you would consider a venture backed business. So the first business was a venture backed business. Sorry, the second business was a venture backed business and a regulated business. We took a big positional bet on kind of regulatory shifts. We got licensed, and some of those bets did not pay off, but we had built an accretive value by building that. And so I think your style changes. I mean, my job has to change a lot, right? When you're a 10-person company to a 200-person company that we're now approaching, it's different. Also, the first business or second business were in person, right? All in person. Now we're a remote first company. So there's these things that you have to change about yourself, change about the style. And I think maybe to answer your question, I mean, maybe not. I mean, I think I've become more comfortable in who I am, and also being comfortable in saying, look, this is what I expect. This is how I'm going to build the business with my core team. And that's right for some people and it's not right for others. And being comfortable to say that, I think wasn't wasn't there in the earlier parts of my career, right? You want to maybe fit the mold and please people. And some of these elements that you see online and I want to be this and that. And, at some point, authenticity, I think, is the biggest thing. I mean, the number one authentic value that I have is transparency. And so we as a company actually share with our entire team how much money did we make last month? What did we do well? Which deals did we sign? What didn't we do well? What's our velocity of dev coding? Like we're very transparent.
Just
And
pure open
earlier in
book.
my career, I wasn't. Right. A lot of companies aren't because you're like, well, I need to tell this great story to my team and everything's perfect. No, like if people don't want to understand that startups are hard and there's lots of challenges, I want to actually share this information. So especially in a remote first environment, you have to be very intentional about being hyper communicative. And
Mm.
so I would say that has shifted now versus earlier on in my career, for sure. Just as you become more comfortable in your role, more comfortable in who you are, and leaning into some of those differences and saying, look, this is different. We may do these things differently. We view this as an advantage, or we aren't willing to compromise on these things.
I resonate, especially on the sort of the tendency to be a bit more people pleasing,
Mm.
especially I think as a CEO because you're sort of galvanizing everybody on your team and on your ship to sort of
Yeah.
row it a certain direction. How did what I guess for people hearing this, they're probably thinking, Edward, that's great. How do I actually build comfort to figure out who I'm authentically as a person and as a leader? How do I actually get there? Like, is it just something I figure out? Are you taking note? How, what is your system of getting to that point where you do get comfortable running a 200-person and fast
Yeah, I
growing
mean,
team?
I think it's lived experiences, right? It's a success and the lot, but also just the losses and the lows. I mean, I think that's really it for me. Look, whether you're successful or whether it's not successful, you still have to live with yourself. And I think that's what I've learned is we've had some really incredible successes. We've had some hard lows. At the end of the day, life continues. and you've got to be able to look at yourself and live with yourself, right? And so for me, it's more about that. Having seen a little bit of success, tasted a bit of success, doesn't like it does. I don't know if it makes you fundamentally happier, right?
Mm.
You have to find what gives you joy, what gives you enjoyment, what does almost and give you pride in yourself, regardless of the outcome. And so I'm very input orientated for myself, especially like a few 2 years, like less than 2 years ago, right? This was a really really hard business to operate in, right? From a regulatory perspective,
Mhm.
us and others had tried really hard to build an incredibly compliant way. And, banks were closing down bank accounts. The SEC was pushing and claiming everything was a security. There's these pieces, and you just have to keep moving forward. And so for me, whether or not things are hard or good, I always do the same. Like I really just obviously the enjoyment that you get from work, but I try to be very diligent in terms of the time that I put in,
Mm.
regardless of necessary output. And so I know that regardless of outcome, I've done my absolute best. And I'm happy with that. I can be happy with that. I can live with that. And so I think that's for me, it's almost separating output or the outcome from you can't control the outputs. What you can control the inputs. And so that's what I really try to focus on is what can I control? And regardless of the output, what makes me proud of doing what I do and gives me fulfillment in what I do.
Well, which is so difficult for a lot of founders, right?
Mhm.
Because it's easier said than done. This is sort of your baby. This is something that you've built. It has you all over it. It's very difficult to separate, yourself from the identity of the company
Yeah.
and the performance of it based on your personal identity.
Mhm.
Yeah, really difficult to do. So that's why I think it's really spot on advice. Let's go back to 2017. All right. I really want you to actually envision being back in 2017 because we're in a very different predicament now, both markets, but also where zero hash is. And I think that was the inception of the company, right? The year when what was actually going through your head? Because it was a very early time in crypto, still in digital assets. Why start zero hash? Where did this come from? What was the light bulb moment, I guess, for you?
Yeah, so I had learned about crypto during my time at MIT. I had a professor called Kristen Catalini who had launched the MIT Bitcoin Club. They'd given a Bitcoin out to every undergraduate student, and I just became fascinated with the technology.
It's a great gift.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, it's funny actually, they've actually published a report on what people did with the Bitcoin. Most people sold it, some people lost it. So very few
Well,
people held on to it. I was always intellectually curious about that. And, the business that we'd done in the commodity space, I'd learned some tough lessons. And I said, look, what are my skill sets? What are my differences? One, I don't mind being in controversial spaces where people self-select out, right? Bitcoin at the time was controversial. People were like, oh, you do XYZ for drug. Like, no, but that's fine if you want to self-select out. I'm fine. I'm fine with people having that. A lot of people don't want that kind of approach. And so I said, okay, this is my advantage. I'm happy to go into spaces. I know regulated industries. I know I can get this done, and I'm a big believer in the underpinning technology stack. And it was really as simple as that. And the naivety of starting businesses, you kind of jump in, and you take that leap of faith to drive forward. I mean, obviously, we've gone through multiple bull runs in crypto, multiple shifts in approach from regulators, different challenges, different pieces. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the founding story. It was what are my differences? What can I lean into? And that's really it.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, third time's a charm for you, my friend. Um, when did you feel like this was, or there was a tipping point? Malcolm Gladwell's book. I always love bringing this up because you've co-founded two companies prior.
Yeah,
One wasn't as formal and serious as the one in the middle. The one in the middle seems like it did well, but some ups and downs there.
yeah.
This one really obviously became a success. And I guess when did you start feeling like this was more serious than maybe probably assumed initially?
I mean, look, we're nowhere near where we want to go. I mean, honestly, I say to my team all the time, we can achieve more in the next 2 years than we have in the last 7.
Hmm.
And that's what keeps me really hungry. So I don't view us as successful, right? Like, yes, we have a good valuation. We've got great customers, but like in terms of success for me is achievement of potential, and we're nowhere near our potential. Especially right now, like the last few years, we've been kind of rowing against the tide, and we've been growing our business year on year. Now the tide's with us. We have to move faster than the tide. So in some ways, it puts a different pressure on us.
It's true. Yeah.
it's like, wow, okay, it should be easy now, right? Every company wants Bitcoin, every company wants stablecoin strategy. That should be easy. So it puts a different sort of pressure in. I try to motivate ourselves by always being the underdog. That's just the way I'm motivated. But yeah, I mean, look, in many ways, we're the incumbent. We've been doing this for a long time. We have some of the largest players, and there's companies out there that want to, frame themselves as the next zero hash with the zero hash of X, or we are taking zero hash. We will eat zero hash as lunch, right? So like, it is a different shift from a founder perspective. Like, oh wow, people are now using zero hash as like their analog, right? I saw a deck yesterday, from a company, uh, that quite literally in the deck to me was like, we're the zero hash of X. And I'm like, wow, okay, that's really cool. But I think that's maybe a tipping point for us, or like being in Chicago, sometimes we go to conferences, people are like, well, wow, zero hash is important. But
Mm.
like, it doesn't mean anything. Like, we are still very early in terms of where this journey can go. The tides have changed. We don't control those, but now we have to swim faster than the tides. For me, just sitting here in a donut rubber ring, just going with the tide and rising the tide, that's not interesting to me. I want to rise quicker than the tide. Otherwise, what's the point? So I think those may be some data points where it's like, okay, wow, this is tangible. This has got some really interesting velocity.
There's momentum. Yeah.
Yeah.
What does success look like to you as a founder? What does that actually? I mean, your
Mm.
answer could be it's sort of never ending. It's perpetual. It's growth the way that we're observing it. But
Yeah.
from where you stand now, what does that actually? Speaking of success.
Yeah. So I think maybe differentiating like success versus value. So success for me
Hmm.
is obviously growing the business, empowering tens of millions, if not billions of people access to this technology through some of the largest companies in the world. I want every Fortune 500 company to have a stable coin accessibility as either an investment product, as a payment mechanism, as a payout mechanism, etc. That for me is objective success. Now, what gives me value and sense of purpose is, for example, making it cheaper to send money cross border, freeing up capital. And these things can be a little bit intangible or fluffy, but that to me is real value. It's effectively what I would call maybe like on chain with a purpose, right? Like, just moving things for technology's sake is not interesting, right? If we think about the internet and what that's unlocked globally, I think that's incredible, right? I think now, if you think about this technology, what purpose does it bring? So for me, it's always about that purpose, on chain with a purpose. In terms of what gives me value, it's people being at zero hash. It's not fun doing this by yourself, right? Like, you've got to have people that want to do this with you, drive through the hard times, and people that you can change their lives, right? Like, as a remote first company, that's particularly true, right? Like, we have people in Brazil, we have people in the Philippines, right? Like,
Mm.
objectively, we can change their lives, and their families' lives. And we're not and because these people are great, smart, incredibly able people that have I would say they're the engine behind the vehicle of zero hash that can allow these things to happen. So for me, that's what honestly gives me the most joy, is seeing, for example, there's people on the team that I've worked with for 6 years. For example, some people in the, some people in the Philippines that joined when we were 20 people, and just seeing the opportunities that we can bring, but completely deserved, right? Like, they've earned it. But
Mm.
that for me is just like seeing people shift the trajectory of their lives. For me, gives me the most joy, honestly.
Hmm. I'm gonna come back to that. I just want to go in terms of people first, and also building in a very remote culture company.
Yeah.
What I want to just get your quick sense on, especially for folks who are not very native to crypto.
Mhm.
So think of like the 101, 101s around crypto
Yeah.
and crypto assets and digital assets. I want to ask you two questions. One is, I heard you on several panels now talk about the difference between this crypto being more of a technology play versus an asset play. Most people, when they think of crypto, if let's say we're sort of on the beginner average scheme, they think of Bitcoin, Ethereum. They think of, oh, if I hold it, it goes up in value. I make money. I can sell it. Why, in your mind, is the technology piece of it way more interesting than it as a pure investable asset?
Yeah. So I think maybe people differentiate now between cryptocurrencies, right? So
Mm.
Bitcoin, Ether, and stable coins, which are effectively tokenized on-chain representations of dollars. And this is, for example, USDC, USDT, an ability to transfer value instantly to anyone who has effectively a wallet. And a wallet effectively is your phone. So the reason I think of this more as a technology is what is Ethereum? The asset. The asset of Ethereum is an incentive mechanism for running a distributed network. And so it's effectively the means, it's not the purpose. The purpose is effectively the Ethereum blockchain, for example, or the Solana blockchain, right? And so, of course, for example, the Solana blockchain can be used for meme coins or what people now term fan coins, right? So Trump coin built on Solana, it allows people to access that. So whatever your view is on that, it's a pretty incredible technology when you think about what it does. It gives you access to the ability to get distribution instantly, cheaply, to effectively everyone in the world. Now, that can be pictures of apes, right? Like bored apes. That
We're
can be,
like $100,000 during COVID.
yeah, that can be tokenized representations of the US president. But like every technology, there are applications that maybe have more perceived value than others. But if you think about, for example, some of our clients that use this technology to transfer value cross-border. So one of our clients is Felix Pago. Felix Pago gives access to the 60 million Latino marketplace in the US that wants to send money cross-border. And right now, it's an incredibly expensive, clunky, slow way of moving money. That is fundamentally disruptive. Secondly, if you think about what this technology can do, and I like this example a lot. So the way that most of us are paid, this is one that's very intuitive. If you think about how we're all paid, we either paid every 2 weeks or we're paid every month. Why do we live in a world where we have pay to earn access or like payday loans, whatever you want to call it? You've already earned the money. One of the reasons companies do not pay you real time or daily is because of the costs of moving money. Now, there are other issues like reconciliation, all these other points, but let's say that we can solve the ability to reduce the cost of transfer. That can completely remove the need for payday lending. That to me is an objective good thing. If you're a two-sided marketplace, if you're a freelancer in the Philippines and you do a piece of work on Upwork or Fiverr, right now you have to wait multiple days, potentially you have to take a loan out. You lose a good portion, 1 to 2% with the multiple intermediate international banks and fees. That's objectively a good thing if you can pay people instantly. So for me, that's why I think of it as a technology. Now, of course, when you send a stable coin on the Ethereum blockchain, you're paying a small amount of Ethereum. That's the decentralized incentive mechanism as opposed to centralized intermediaries. So that's why I think of it. It, of course, is an investable asset because if you're bullish on the Ethereum blockchain or the Solana blockchain and the applications, the price will go up. But that's why I view it as a technology. And those are some of the examples that hopefully outline that.
Yeah, 100%. Well, when you think, and I know you're very bullish on the growth of stablecoins, which for a lot of folks listening, you probably already know this, but it's basically the tokenization of a fiat currency like the USD. I don't want to steer your thunder, but give us sort of two quick anecdotes because I know I've heard you say this before. In terms of, I think what people don't realize when they think, because a lot of what we do already seems digital.
Yep.
Right. I think for, again, the non-native, they like, I can e-transfer you now, I can sell you now.
Yeah.
So in their mind, it's like, well, what difference is a stable coin going to give me as an advantage? And
Yeah.
they might not realize some of the limitations they have in terms of time. Sometimes if you're past 5 p.m. or weekend,
Yeah.
the restrictions that we have daily with the current structure versus what this actually enables us to do. So
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a great point. And look, I don't think that like any technology, it's a binary. We only use this technology, right? Like we have the email, but we still have a mail service, right? Like we have email, but we also text or we change mechanisms. So
call you up.
yeah, exactly. So technology doesn't mean it's a binary one to thing. I think it's more of a supplemental value and value will then win. But there are limitations. So yes, I can move money to you, George. We're both in the US. But what happens if I want to send money to my family in the UK? Or what happens if I want to send money cross-border instantly? That doesn't exist. Then secondly, even in the US, there's a lot of limitations around the payment mechanisms that we have. So, for example, to your point, it's not 24/7, 365. And people say, well, why is that important to me? Okay, well, it could be important to you if you want to do a trade on a Saturday, 24 market trading, if you want to use an event-based trading marketplace. For the business, it's incredibly attractive because one of the inherent features of stablecoins is that they're irreversible. So there's no chargeback risk. And this is not what not many people understand. Is like fraud and scams for traditional fiat methods is very high. It's hard to manage, right? And so I would say that it's about the perspective that you have and it's about the use case. And it's also changing your paradigm, right? Like we accept being paid every 2 weeks. Now we're lucky. We don't think about that, right? We're paid enough that we're in a fortunate position that being paid every 2 weeks, I don't need to get, a payday loan. But 70% of Americans can't handle $1,000
Emergency.
surprise, such as a car breakdown. But you've already earned the money because you have done the job, but you haven't got paid. And so that's the beauty of when you make things cheaper, instant, and real time, the applications can be numerous and change the paradigms and change the way that we think about things. And I still think we're very, very early, right? I gave you the implementation of payday loans. But what about as we think about AI? Let's all think about that we have AI implemented within our lives. The ability to have programmable money with controls and ownership and the ability for effectively AI agents to pay other AI agents. We're still very early. So payments are a critical part of the evolution of any technology and a part of our lives. And so I think as you think about what can change, I think the paradigms of payments also starts to change. And so hopefully those are some tangible examples. Look, we're very, very early as a percentage of the total payment global infrastructure. It's still relatively small,
Mhm.
but it's going to change very quickly. So in the US, for example, there's a stablecoin bill that will 100% pass Congress and Congress and be signed into law, and that's going to make this technology omnipresent. And then now then that makes it much easier for actual utility unlocks to happen. But look, if it's easier to send a wire or it's more efficient to do a Zelle or a Venmo, then great.
Do it.
But what?
Mm.
But like another example, you're on Venmo and I'm on Cash App. Okay, one of us has to open up a new account. The beauty of stablecoins is I can send you a stablecoin from Venmo to Cash App.
Mm. Yeah,
That's
it's
the beauty.
non-platform specific, which is
Exactly, exactly. So it reduces friction on payment. So again, I don't think I have every single answer, every single B2C case, but I hope there's some good examples. But again, we're very, very early.
yeah. Speaking of change real quick, you've been in this space for long enough that you've probably heard every rebuttal, or sort of hesitancy or, risk aversion to whatever you're building in this space entirely, whether it's, the risk of fraud. And when you say real time, it's too quick. Like who's actually doing some prevention? It's cross border. So is anybody actually checking where the money's going or where the money's coming from? High level, what's your overall consensus from what you've seen over the past 8 years?
Look, technology, like any technology, can be misused. And we spend a huge amount of time and resources to try and prevent that. Outside of technology and product, our largest team is compliance and legal. But equally, there are some unique functionalities of decentralized infrastructure that can be used to prevent bad actors. Not to go too ethereal, but if you think about on-chain transaction monitoring, it's a very we can see where everything goes. You can see where money moves. Like a lot of the time when you are sending money, banks don't have that insight of all these other pieces. Cash, you don't have these instincts and these pieces. So look, the tooling in this space has increased exponentially. Chain Analysis, one of the leading providers in the space, has released a report around the percentage of crypto and stablecoins used for bad actors. It's less than it is for checks. It's less than it is for cash. But is it zero? No. And I think a lot of people are focused on solving that problem. And at the end of the day, I can speak for myself and a lot of people in this industry. We do not want to move money for bad people. And we spend a lot of time and money for
It's
that.
not in your interest.
No,
Fundament.
it's not in our interest. But secondly, it's not ethically why I spend the amount of time in my life building this business. And so I think those are all fair points. And the industry can always do more. And there's always bad actors in any industry. But
Mm.
data points that really show that this is a really bad way to do bad things. And it's increasingly becoming more difficult.
Understood. I want to spend the last couple of minutes going back to building a remote first culture.
Mhm.
There, to this day, we're 5 years past COVID, and remote cultures were still prevalent even before COVID, but more so obviously within the past 4 years. A ton of debate, as I'm sure you've seen, and different takes on how to actually do this. And some folks who want to be fully in person, and some or remote, or some that are hybrid.
Yeah.
How have you maintained a strong culture? Because obviously it seems like there's been a good culture. Employee count is growing. The company is doing well. I know it's not in your eyes ultra successful just yet, but the growth is there. How have you maintained, to do that? It's not an easy
Yeah.
thing to do.
Look, I think one has been very intentional about what we are and what we're not, and making clear that, look, we are a remote first company. I think hybrid can sometimes be difficult.
It's confusing. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes you have like this two-tiered system, right? Like naturally, people that are closer to me geographically have some degree of advantage, right? And just because you know people more. I think there's two key points. One, remote first does not mean that we never meet in person. I meet my leadership at least once a month in person. So every single director report that I have, I meet monthly
Mm.
without fail, in person. Secondly, we meet as a company at least every 12 to 18 months in person to spend that time together. I think That's the key thing. Secondly, I think, we're very much a tech-first company. We're at a stage in growth that we have a clear objective, a clear path, a clear provability. We're still experimenting pretty heavily on different things, but it's not like you're going, 0 to 1. And I think that's definitely harder, remote. We are starting to, and then thirdly is kind of just the way that we approach this. We are very intentional in our transparency with the team, as I mentioned before. And I think that transparency gives people more context, because that's the hardest thing, is context. And also, maybe finally, not to keep going, but we we actually outline to everyone in the company why we are remote first. And there's two core drivers. One, we're a global business that is seeking to be globally regulated. We have to have people based globally in order to run that business. Secondly, we run a 24/7, 365 business. Somebody's working every single day. They're not just watching, they're actually working. So we have a 24/7, 365 support team. If engineers are needed, it's during their, if it's escalated, it's during their work, their waking hours, so to speak. And then thirdly, I philosophically do not believe that the best talent in the world, one, is within 100 miles of me, or two, is able to be within 100 miles of me for different reasons.
Mm.
And so we're very precise as to why we're remote first. There are obviously challenges, but I think we're very clear as a business as to why we're remote, what advantages we see being remote, and then equally not equating remote to never seeing your colleagues in person. Because of course there is a value of seeing people in person.
There is that philosophical answer that I love. Clearly, a lot of thought that went into it. So thank you for breaking that down. You've raised more than $170 million.
Mhm.
Accurate?
Yes.
I'm going to say that one more time. 170 million of a growing company. You're the co-founder and the CEO. You also constantly have to evolve yourself while being authentic and genuine and kind of maintaining your leadership style. What about all of this scares you, if any?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think for me, it's just not achieving our potential. Honestly, it's just not achieving our potential. Like, it requires sacrifice to build a business. It's not easy. It doesn't necessarily get easy. There's just different challenges at different stages, right? Like it's not that you're worried, like, so early on, it's like, okay, are we going to have enough money in the bank? Like, we're super well capitalized now. It gives you an ability to think a bit longer term. But for me, it's just about, if we're going to do this, let's win, right? I'm not one for halves. That to me is what scares me, is not being able to achieve our potential.
Mm.
But I sometimes say this, that I try to narrow my emotional bounds, not being overly fearful in bad times and not being overly exuberant in great times. Because it's very hard to build a business. I think it's very hard to work with people like that, because things change very quickly, sometimes out of your control. And I gave you some examples earlier of things that exogenous shocks in our system. And there's been a lot of good news the last 3-4 months in our space. But the business, I don't like this brake and accelerant mindset. I think you don't build long-term value. And so for us, I try to really narrow the emotional bounds that I have in terms of building a business.
Yeah, very. Is this sort of a drawing on stoicism at all, or just
Yeah,
similar?
yeah.
But
I honestly, I mean, I think yes, but I think it wasn't something I read. I think it's just something I learned, that at the end of the day, if you have a bad, like, you have to process your emotions pretty quickly. Otherwise, you just can't. Like, it's how you react and tangibly react. And and we're emotional beings, right? I'm an emotional like, but it you have to process that, I think. And I think, stoicism has a lot of value in order to make clear decisions and actually improve the situation that you're in, or take advantage of good things, but equally not being overly exuberant.
got it. Well, Marcus Aurelius would be proud. I'm gonna end on one last one, to be mindful of your time, Edward. I appreciate this on a Friday as it rains profusely outside in Chicago. I usually ask founders or CEOs or both lessons learned. I think we've covered enough of that today. What I want to ask you, if you're okay with me sharing this personally, you're a new father,
Mhm.
so very happy for you. And I actually got to meet the little one. I think like 3-4 months ago. It suits you very well. I'd like to ask, what lessons have you learned as both an entrepreneur and a new dad?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I've seen quite a few discussions on X around, does becoming a parent make you a better founder, a better person? I mean, I think it definitely gives you maybe more empathy, right? It can be challenging to juggle these balls. I think we were always flexible as a company with parents. I think flexibility is key, and that's one of the advantages of being a remote first company, is that you can be hyper flexible. And that's to my point about, talent earlier. And so for me, it's maybe even more aware of that. Like to my point about talent being within 100 miles of me, to have somebody to come into the office every day, sometimes people just have to self-select out of those roles, even though they're incredibly able and want to work incredibly hard. But like they just have to be at home or pick up the kids at 3 to 5, right? Like that's just the way it works. And so I think it's reinforced that. I think it's one of those things that definitely for me has made me happier, right? I think there's very like just fundamentally
More
gives you
fulfilled.
different sort of perspective, right? Whether it's good or bad, my child definitely is the most important thing in my life. And so it gives you a different perspective in terms of processing things, I think, even more effectively, right? Like, as long as my kid is happy and healthy, how bad can a bad day at work really do, right? And I think it just gives you that sense of perspective. And equally, like, cool, my kid doesn't care if, we close a massive deal, right? Like it goes back to that point about inputs versus outputs, right? So I think for me, it's given me maybe a good it's given me more perspective on life. So for me, it's been a really good thing.
Love that. Yeah, a great way to level set things in life. Well, kudos to you, my friend. I know the road has been long, arduous, successful, and I know hard at many points, but no doubt that it'll continue to rise uphill.
No, I
So,
appreciate that. And I appreciate the support over the years as well.
of course, thanks, Ed. Appreciate it.